Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the marble halls of ancient Macedonia, where gold gleams, wine flows, and nobody's quite sure who's holding the next hidden dagger. You're standing in the heart of a wedding. Flute music twirls in the air, noblemen adjust their cloaks, and dancers swirl like smoke in candlelight. But before the night ends, the king, yes, the king, will be dead on the steps of his own palace. That king is Philip II, the one-eyed, steel-willed ruler of Macedonia. He's a man who's won battles with half his face crushed, unified most of Greece, and still found time to collect wives like Pokemon cards. But tonight, under a sky dripping with torches and celebration, someone drives a blade into his ribs in front of half the kingdom. And here's your bedtime warning. You probably won't survive this power struggle unless you're either very charming or already in the grave. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and your local time. I love knowing where in the world you're winding down. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the dusty courtyard of Aegae, the old capital of Macedonia, where ancient bones lie just beneath the polished stone. The wedding is in full swing. Garlands dangle from the columns, and horses stamp impatiently under heavy gold harnesses. Philip II of Macedonia, grizzled, proud, and wearing a breastplate polished to a mirror sheen, leads a procession into the theater to celebrate the marriage of his daughter Cleopatra. Not to be confused with that Cleopatra. The Egyptian one won't be born for over a century. This Cleopatra is Philip's daughter from an earlier marriage. She's just wed Alexander of Epirus, who also happens to be Philip's brother-in-law. Yes, royal weddings are weird. Like, really weird. Keep your family tree diagrams handy. The crowd roars in approval as Philip steps forward. He raises a hand in that politician's mix of blessing and command. Behind him, nobles, commanders, even a few skeptical Spartan diplomats follow. But something's wrong. No guards flank him. No bodyguards. A single man pushes through the line. He's fast, close. Too close. In a flash of bronze, a dagger sinks deep into Philip's side. The king gasps once and collapses. Blood fans out across the marble. There's a long pause, a silence sharp enough to slice the air. Then chaos. The assassin bolts. His name is Pausanias, and he's no ordinary killer. He's a member of the king's own royal guard, a somatophylax, one of just 7 elite protectors. And now he's sprinting for the city gates like a man possessed. Historians still argue whether the lack of guards that day was a careless oversight or a calculated setup. Why would a king as seasoned and as paranoid as Philip appear so exposed? It's like walking into Times Square wearing a meat coat and hoping the wolves are on vacation. Guards give chase, finally catching Pausanias just outside the city. They stab him to death without a trial. Not a single word escapes his lips. Convenient, isn't it? The crowd, once jubilant, now bubbles with panic and suspicion. Some mourn, some flee. Others, you suspect, already knew this was coming. Alexander, yes, that Alexander, not yet the Great, watches the whole thing. He's just 20, a prince with more muscle than beard, but his eyes don't flinch when the blood hits the stone. His mother, Olympias, is nowhere to be seen. She's probably pacing in her quarters like a general before battle. Philip's body is dragged away, already stiffening. Macedonian tradition demands a public funeral, a pyre high enough to touch the gods. But under the smoke, something darker curls. Rumors, secrets, old debts. The official story is as clean as the dagger's edge. A loyal guard snapped. Personal grudge. Maybe a touch of madness. Let's all move on. But you're not buying it. Neither are half the people in Aegae. Because here's what makes the skin prickle at the back of your neck. This wasn't some back alley ambush or rogue mercenary. This was a royal killing, staged during a royal wedding, right in front of Macedonia's most powerful elites. Either Pausanias had a death wish, or he had help. Mainstream sources like Diodorus and Plutarch agree on the who, but not the why. Depending on who you believe, Pausanias was a jilted ex-lover of the king, avenging a personal insult that went unpunished, being used as a pawn by bigger players, then silenced before he could squeal. There's even a weird little theory that Pausanias believed his name would live on in glory for freeing Macedonia from a tyrant. Bit dramatic, maybe, but these guys read a lot of Homer. Here's a tidbit that makes historians bite their pens. At the exact time of the assassination, Alexander had been reintroduced to the succession line after briefly being disowned. Coincidence? You can hear the history teacher sighing. One mainstream fact? Philip had plans. Big ones. He was assembling a pan-Hellenic force to invade Persia. The old king had spent decades welding Greece together, mostly by stabbing it into compliance. And now he was about to cross the Hellespont and claim his own slice of immortality. That makes his death very inconvenient for anyone hoping to stop him or replace him. Some scholars note that Philip, in his later years, made enemies faster than he made children. He insulted nobles, exiled friends, and wed his seventh wife, Cleopatra Eurydice, not long before his death. That marriage alone lit royal tempers on fire. Olympias, Alexander's mother, wasn't thrilled about being replaced with a much younger woman who was also fully Macedonian by blood. In dynastic terms, that made her child, Alexander, look less pure in the eyes of the traditionalists. See the problem? Now imagine you're Olympias. You've clawed your way to the top, birthed a legend-in-waiting stack, and suddenly your husband marries a teenage rival and starts acting like your son might not get the crown. What do you do? If your answer is, attend a wedding and smile politely, you're probably not ancient Macedonian royalty. So here lies Philip II, bleeding into history, while Macedon tips on its axis. Somewhere nearby, Alexander tightens his cloak. He knows what comes next, and so do you. You blink once and the torches have already burned lower. The celebration has curdled into silence. Somewhere a wine goblet lies overturned, red staining the dust in a rude echo of the king's blood. And just like that, the Lion of Macedon is gone. But let's rewind the clock a bit. Before the dagger. Before the wedding. Back to the final, uneasy years of Philip's life, when the cracks in his armor were starting to show. Philip II of Macedon was never what you'd call subtle. This is a man who lost an eye at the siege of Methone and kept fighting like a pirate with a hangover. A man who invented the sarissa, a 20-foot spear that basically turned his army into a wall of death. He didn't just unify Macedonia. He bent most of Greece to his will, like someone assembling IKEA furniture with a warhammer. But even lions age. And by the time Philip's hair was more gray than gold, he wasn't just fighting Spartans and Thracians anymore. He was fighting shadows in his own court. In these last years, he began to behave more erratically. Some historians think paranoia had set in, the kind that creeps in like cold air under a door. Others think he was just getting bold, drunk on power, and convinced of his own invincibility. That's always when history starts setting the table for disaster. He took more wives, one after another, until he had at least 7, maybe more if you count diplomatic entanglements. Each marriage was a chess move, tying him to a new tribe, a fresh set of nobles, or another region he'd either conquered or wanted to pacify. One of his wives was from Thessaly, another Illyrian, another the niece of a Persian satrap. You get the idea. His bedroom map was almost as complicated as his war map. Then came Cleopatra Eurydice, his last queen, and the one who made everything unravel. She was young, like could be in a modern high school yearbook young. Most dangerously, she was full-blooded Macedonian nobility, and that meant her future children would be full-blooded too. You hear that? That's the sound of Olympias grinding her molars from across the palace. Olympias, Philip's 4th wife and mother of Alexander, wasn't the type to go quietly into obscurity. She was from Epirus, a Molossian princess with a taste for oracles, omens, and snakes. Literally snakes. She kept them as pets and may have used them in religious rituals. So, yeah, she wasn't exactly into baking pies and smiling in portraits. When Philip married Cleopatra Eurydice, Olympias wasn't just humiliated, she was effectively sidelined. Whispers spread that Philip might favor his new queen's unborn child over Alexander. After all, that kid would have pure Macedonian blood. And Alexander? Half foreign, half too ambitious. Tensions rose like steam from a boiling pot. Philip publicly scolded Alexander at a feast. Some sources say Alexander insulted his father's drunkenness. Others claim he threw wine in the wrong direction and walked out in fury. In any case, the prince fled with his mother to Epirus soon after, effectively exiled. This domestic mess was a royal migraine. Macedonia wasn't exactly known for smooth transitions of power. The nobility liked their kings strong, and their succession obvious. And now, the heir was sulking in a foreign court. The queen was scorned, and the king was flaunting a teenage bride. That's not a dynasty. That's a reality show. Still, Philip wasn't done. He was planning his greatest campaign yet, a massive invasion of the Persian Empire, Greece's centuries-old nemesis. The plan was brilliant. Unite the fractious Greek states under one banner, then channel their aggression eastward. A campaign of glory, loot, and legacy. He even sent scouts ahead, built ships, wrote speeches, and he chose his general carefully. Parmenion, the grizzled warhound who'd fought in more campaigns than most Macedonians had birthdays. And guess who else he brought back into the fold? Alexander. With an almost theatrical sense of timing, Philip suddenly mended things with his son. Maybe he realized he'd gone too far. Maybe the Persian War needed a poster prince. Or maybe, just maybe, he wanted to keep his enemies closer. Either way, Alexander was welcomed back, but not entirely trusted. Sources suggest Philip treated him with a calculated coldness, never quite letting his guard down again. Then came the wedding, a grand gesture of unity. Philip's daughter Cleopatra, the other Cleopatra, remember, marrying Alexander of Epirus, Olympias' brother. A chance to heal rifts and toast the future. Or maybe just one last party before the purge. Because underneath the music and the vows, the king was still vulnerable. His enemies hadn't gone anywhere. And Olympias, she was back too. Smiling that snake handler smile. You walk alongside Philip now, a silent shadow. He looks tired. His gait is confident, but slower than you expect. You notice the small things, how he holds his arm a little stiffly, how his hand rests near his belt, like he expects trouble. But where are the guards? That's the detail that keeps coming back. Macedonian kings didn't go anywhere alone, especially not to public events. Especially not in front of every noble in the country. Yet here's Philip, walking like a man who's either fearless or foolish. Historians still argue whether this was arrogance or an inside job. Some claim Philip insisted on walking unguarded to demonstrate his people's loyalty. Others suggest someone close to him arranged the lack of protection. Pausanias, the assassin, must have known this moment was coming. He didn't just wake up that morning and think, hey, today's a good day to stab royalty. He waited, watched, chose this day, this ceremony, this exact moment with thousands watching. And what happened after? Almost immediately, suspiciously immediately, the assassin was run down and killed before he could speak. Philip's body was carted off. Funeral preparations began, cloaked in ritual and smoke, but the political vultures had already landed. Alexander was now king, and somehow, no one really questioned it. The lion had fallen. But his cub wasn't mourning. He was already standing in the blood, measuring the throne. You're still an A guy, but the scent in the air has shifted, from roasted meats and fresh garlands to smoke, blood, and the oily perfume of embalming oils. The king is dead, and the gossip is alive. But to understand the real storm, you have to look at the complicated, often combustible bond between Alexander and his father, Philip II. From the outside, it looked like a model royal duo. Father the general, son the golden prodigy. But behind the bronze statues and staged smiles, let's just say, they were more Game of Thrones than Father Knows Best. Alexander had always been exceptional. By 12, he'd tamed a wild horse that terrified Philip's best warriors. That horse, Bucephalus, would go on to carry Alexander through half the known world, a solid flex. By 13, his tutor was Aristotle. Yes, the Aristotle. Which is kind of like getting physics lessons from Einstein. He taught the boy philosophy, logic, poetry, biology, and likely how to side-eye a court full of power-hungry adults without blinking. But what he couldn't teach Alexander? How to outgrow a father like Philip. See, Philip didn't raise soldiers. He forged them. His love was tough, transactional, and rooted in performance. He respected strength, scorned weakness, and expected obedience, which doesn't work great when your son is a once-in-a-generation genius with a dash of divine ego. They fought often, not just swordplay and speeches. Real, teeth-gritting, pride-bruising battles. Philip mocked Alexander's philosophers. Alexander mocked his father's indulgences. And when Philip began stacking up wives like diplomatic trophies, Alexander saw it for what it was, a political power shift that could push him out of the line of succession. The last straw came at that wedding feast, long before the assassination. Philip, drunk, makes a toast suggesting he and Cleopatra Eurydice will have a legitimate heir. Subtle, right? Alexander, also wine-warmed, doesn't let it slide. He rises, furious, and shouts, "So I'm a bastard now?" or something to that effect. Sources differ. Some say he threw his goblet, others say he challenged someone to a duel, but the effect was the same: chaos. Philip leapt to his feet, sword in hand, and then promptly fell flat on his face. Cue awkward silence, maybe a chuckle from the shadows. Alexander left the court that night with his mother, storming off to her homeland in Epirus. The family was officially fractured. For nearly a year, father and son didn't speak. Olympias fumed. Alexander stewed. And meanwhile, Philip carried on, marrying, feasting, planning his Persian conquest, and making nobles pick sides like it was dodgeball. Some stuck with Alexander, including old-school generals like Parmenion. Others drifted toward Cleopatra Eurydice, whispering about a new heir, a cleaner bloodline, a better future. And then, out of nowhere, Philip calls Alexander back. An invitation, a pardon, a suspiciously timed olive branch. Most agree this came just months before the wedding and the murder. Historians still debate what changed Philip's mind. Did he fear rebellion from the factions loyal to Alexander? Did he realize Cleopatra hadn't yet produced a male heir? Or was it all part of some larger, deeply political stage play? Here's the twist. When Alexander returned, he brought an entourage of loyal friends and warriors. Among them, a man named Hephaestion, often whispered to be more than a friend. Their bond was deep, maybe romantic, definitely unbreakable. And to those watching closely, it was clear Alexander didn't come back with humility. He came back ready. It's around this time that Philip began to seem uneasy. He restructured parts of his court, reassigned certain officers, moved loyalties around like chess pieces, almost like he was preparing for something or someone. Meanwhile, Olympias didn't return with her son. She stayed behind, brooding in Epirus, but you get the feeling her influence never left Philip's palace. Letters flew back and forth. She was known for her cunning, her rituals, her snakes, both literal and metaphorical. And Pausanias? Oh, he was still there, still part of the royal guard, still brooding over old wounds. See, here's where things get even murkier. According to some sources, Pausanias of Orestis had once been close to Philip, like personal bodyguard who sleeps just outside your door close. But after a public humiliation, either from being passed over for honors or possibly from being abused by another noble with Philip's tacit approval, he became bitter, dangerous. One fringe theory? Pausanias felt betrayed by the king, not because of lost love, but because Philip allowed another man to harm him, then covered it up. That kind of grudge can simmer like oil on a fire. And the people around him? They either saw it and looked away, or they helped. Olympias, for example, would have had every reason to exploit Pausanias' rage. He hated Philip. She hated Philip. What's a little shared vengeance between old court acquaintances? Of course, there's no hard proof. Macedonian courts weren't big on writing down confessions. But the overlapping motives are impossible to ignore. Philip was surrounded by people who wanted him dead. A scorned bodyguard with a knife and a motive. A former wife exiled and insulted. A son shuffled in and out of favor like a spare pair of boots. Nobles jockeying for power under a new regime. Foreign agents, Persians, Greeks, even rival Macedonians, eager to derail the invasion of Asia. You feel it, don't you? The noose tightening, the way each player starts to edge closer to the fire. And through it all, Alexander watches, learns, sharpens. He's 20, hungry, humiliated once but never again. And when the king falls, when blood stains the wedding floor, he doesn't blink. He doesn't panic. He steps forward, as if he always knew this moment was coming. You hear the trumpets before you see the silk. The sun breaks over Agai like golden oil spilling down a marble bowl, and the palace glimmers like it knows today will be remembered forever. This is the day of the royal wedding. Cleopatra, daughter of King Philip, is to marry Alexander of Epirus, Olympias' brother, the prince from across the mountains. It's a dazzling affair. You can almost feel the perfume clinging to your skin, the layers of gold thread brushing your shoulders as you edge through the crowd. Guests arrive on horseback and by litter, nobles in furs and warriors in bronze, each with a blade under the belt and a rumor behind the tongue. They smile too wide and laugh too loud. Something underneath is tense, buzzing like a hornet in a wine jug. Philip is radiant today, or at least he pretends to be. He's draped in white, his one good eye scanning the crowd like a hawk, while his steps remain deliberate. The wedding isn't just about family, it's a masterstroke of diplomacy. Marrying his daughter to Olympias' brother mends bruised alliances and sends a signal. Macedonia is unified again. All hail the house of Argead. All hail the father of Greece. But you can feel it, can't you? The danger humming beneath the decorations. It's in the tight smiles of the generals, the stiff posture of the guards. It's in the fact that Alexander isn't beside his father as he enters the theater. Now that's strange. Traditionally, a crown prince would be right there, at the king's elbow, sharing the glory. But Alexander? He's hanging back, just out of reach, like a chess piece held in reserve. Is it humility, tactics, or distance? Historians still argue whether this separation was accidental or symbolic. Some say it was nothing more than ceremonial staging. Others see it as a deliberate snub, or perhaps a safety measure, just in case things got bloody. And, oh, do they? You move with the crowd toward the theater. It's built into the slope of the hill, marble seats fanning out like frozen applause. The air is rich with crushed herbs, smoke, and tension. The royal family files in, Cleopatra glowing in gold, her new husband in purple, flanked by noble families from both sides. Philip strides at the head of the procession. He's bare of armor today. No helmet, no bodyguards at his side. Just a ceremonial robe and the weight of half a dozen conquests behind him. He looks confident, maybe too confident. Then, just as he reaches the entrance to the theater, a flash of motion. Pausanias. Quick, precise. A glint of metal, and then the dagger buries deep into Philip's ribs, right side, just below the heart. Philip gasps, buckles, and collapses. The sound is wet and sudden, like someone dropping a wineskin onto a stone floor. Screams, shouts. One general grabs for a sword. Another freezes. A woman faints. You're jolted by the silence that follows the moment of violence, the kind of quiet that only comes after something irreversible. Pausanias doesn't hesitate. He bolts, shoves a noble aside, races down the hill. He knows this terrain. He's trained for this kind of escape. His boots pound against the gravel, his eyes fixed on the city gates. He just might make it. But then, just beyond the trees, Philip's remaining guards catch up. And this is where things get suspicious. Pausanias is killed on the spot. No attempt to capture him. No interrogation. No trial. Just a sword through the spine and a nod of satisfaction. A convenient corpse. You tilt your head. Too clean. Too quick. You've seen enough royal dramas to know when something doesn't smell right, and this stinks of forethought. Some scholars have pointed out that Pausanias was slain by close allies of Alexander, not Philip's senior guards. That's the kind of detail that makes you pause, especially when you learn what happened immediately after. Alexander is declared king. No delay. No debate. Macedonian nobles rally behind him faster than you can blink. The body isn't even cold, and the crown is already finding a new brow. Historians still argue over the exact timeline. Did Alexander know in advance? Was he complicit? Or was he simply poised like a sprinter at the starting block, waiting for fate to fire the gun? As for Olympias, she doesn't show her face in Aegae that day, but her fingerprints are all over the aftermath. Here's a fun, creepy fringe tidbit. Some say Olympias made sacrifices to the gods the night before the wedding, offerings that included black animals and chants meant to draw divine justice. Others say she sent Pausanias a dagger, wrapped in silk and scented with lavender. Urban legend? Maybe. But if you're casting roles in a murder mystery, she makes a very compelling villain. Back at the theater, Philip's body is wrapped in linens and taken to the royal tombs. The wedding guests disperse like feathers in a windstorm. What began as a symbol of unity has turned into a wake, and through it all, Alexander stands calm, unsmiling, calculating. He addresses the army the very next morning, promises vengeance, justice, stability. His voice is firm, steady, almost rehearsed. Then he starts making moves. The nobles who once whispered loyalty to Cleopatra Eurydice, they vanish. The priest who raised doubts about Alexander's succession, sent into exile. The general who hesitated at the theater gate, reassigned to a distant frontier. Even the teenage bride of Philip, Cleopatra Eurydice herself, is found dead along with her newborn. Some say she hanged herself in grief. Others say Olympias sent her a message, wrapped in the same linen used for Philip's burial robe. And just like that, the wedding becomes a funeral. The funeral becomes a coronation, and the coronation becomes a purge. You walk the same marble path again, retracing steps now shadowed by blood. The garlands are gone, the perfume replaced by the scent of cold stone and burning oil. This isn't just a kingdom mourning a king. It's a kingdom learning a lesson. In Macedonia, power doesn't pass gently. It is taken quietly, efficiently, and often by someone smiling from the shadows. You know how people always say, keep your friends close and your enemies closer? In ancient Macedonia, that phrase wasn't just a clever saying, it was a survival strategy. And no one knew that better than the man with the dagger, Pausanias of Orestis. Now, picture him not as a faceless assassin, but as someone with a name, a rank, a tragic backstory, and quite possibly a very long grudge. He wasn't some random street rogue hired off the back alleys of Pella. Pausanias was one of Philip's 7 royal bodyguards, the Somatophylakes, a title that basically means, I will die to protect you, or maybe kill you instead. It's a weird resume line, right? He'd trained for years in close-quarters combat, knew the king's daily routines, his moods, his routes through the palace. If anyone could get close enough to kill Philip during a packed public ceremony, it was him. And boy, did he do it well. Too well, maybe. Historians still debate whether Pausanias acted alone or was nudged into action, because the cleanest murders are never the messiest ones. And this one? It went down like choreography. A quick stab, a confident dash toward the gates, and then, bam, death before questioning. Let's get personal for a second. Pausanias wasn't just a soldier. According to ancient sources, particularly from Aristotle and later Roman historians, he'd once been romantically involved with Philip, or at the very least, had a deeply personal connection. Their relationship was rumored to be complex, blending loyalty, intimacy, and possibly resentment. And when that bond fractured, when Philip took up with a new Pausanias, yes, confusingly, same name, things got nasty. In one infamous incident, the second Pausanias, the newer model, was attacked and killed, possibly as a result of the first Pausanias' jealousy. But when the original Pausanias expected justice, Philip kind of brushed it off. That stung. Badly. Worse, Philip's silence might have been political. He needed alliances with the powerful noble families connected to the second Pausanias. So the king, always the chess player, left the first Pausanias to stew in betrayal. And you know what they say, hell hath no fury like a bodyguard scorned. And here's a quirky little fact. Macedonians were known for treating their royal pages and guards as part of the royal family, but that often included very complicated and not always healthy relationships. So Pausanias' experience wasn't totally unique, just particularly combustible. But wait, it gets more tangled. The man who insulted or abused Pausanias, depending on the version you believe, was one Attalus, a powerful noble, general, and oh yeah, uncle to Cleopatra Eurydice, Philip's brand new Macedonian wife. Small world, huh? Attalus reportedly humiliated Pausanias publicly. Some accounts say it was a verbal dressing down. Others say it went far beyond that. Whatever it was, it left Pausanias deeply wounded, and Philip once again did nothing. Or worse, promoted Attalus soon after. So now our assassin has a shattered personal bond with the king, a sense of betrayal by the royal court, a noble enemy backed by royal blood, no justice from the only man who could give it. Oh, and let's not forget, Pausanias was still in the palace, still attending Philip, still holding a dagger every morning and night. You see the problem, right? Some historians lean into the theory that Pausanias acted purely out of vengeance, a clean-cut personal motive. But others point out that personal vengeance doesn't usually come with such perfect timing or such tidy results. Think about it. The moment of the assassination was high profile. It ensured witnesses. It ensured public shock. But most importantly, it ensured Alexander was right there to take over. So was Pausanias being manipulated, encouraged, promised safety, and then sacrificed? Fringe theories swirl like incense smoke around this point. One particularly juicy suggestion. Olympias herself played therapist to Pausanias, feeding his resentment, whispering about justice, and maybe, just maybe, handing him the blade. Sound far-fetched? Well, Olympias did immediately honor Pausanias after his death. Some say she buried his body in a hero's tomb and had offerings made in his name. That's not exactly the treatment you give your husband's murderer, unless you ordered the hit yourself. Of course, there's no official confession, no gotcha scroll, but what you do have is an astonishing coincidence. Pausanias dies before he can be interrogated. No note, no accomplice, no testimony, just dead silence. And that, more than anything, makes historians squint. Because here's the deal. Pausanias could have exposed conspirators. He could have unraveled a web of court secrets. But instead, he was killed almost immediately. by guards suspiciously loyal to Alexander. The whole sequence looks suspiciously like a cleanup operation, an ancient version of tie up loose ends. And yet we still don't know. Was he a rogue actor with a vendetta and the worst impulse control in ancient Macedonia? Or a tool, sharp, loyal, and ultimately disposable, used by bigger players? Alexander never mentions Pausanias publicly again. Not once. Olympias never denies her rumored involvement. In fact, her actions speak louder than any denial ever could. And Pausanias? Well, he becomes a ghost, a whisper, a knife-shaped shadow behind one of the greatest transitions of power in classical history. The man with the dagger walked out of the shadows once and was swallowed right back into them. You stand at the edge of the woods, where the grass is still flattened from the rush of feet. The spot where Pausanias fell is quiet now, just breeze and birdsong. But if you listen closely, you can almost hear the echoes of a man gasping his last breath, and the clink of bronze armor as his killers wiped their blades clean. Dead men, after all, don't talk. That was the point, wasn't it? As the sun rises over Ege, and Philip's body cools under a shroud of silence, a second body, Pausanias's, lies sprawled and forgotten, or rather, conveniently removed from history's interrogation chair. A single stab to Philip? That could be personal. But killing the assassin immediately, now that's a statement, or a cover-up, or both. Historians still argue whether Pausanias was meant to die that day. Was his death planned by those who enabled the murder, or was it a botched attempt to silence him that went too well? Either way, he never made it to trial, and more importantly, he never made it to questions. You imagine it, don't you? Pausanias pinned under 3 guards, blood pouring out of his mouth, trying to say something, anything, and no one leaning close enough to hear. The men who killed him were members of Alexander's inner circle. Let that sink in. There's a version of this story where the guards were just doing their job, chase the assassin, eliminate the threat, restore order. But there's another version, one whispered in the palace corridors, where those same guards were ordered not to capture, but to erase. No questions, no messy testimonies, just one neat corpse. And if you were plotting a royal assassination, that's exactly how you'd want it. Dramatic in public, quiet in the aftermath. Here's a grim but oddly specific tidbit. Some ancient sources describe how Pausanias tripped while fleeing, his sandal catching in a tree root or on a rock, and that's when the guards closed in. Sounds random, right? Except you know what doesn't usually happen during a high-speed escape? Tripping right at the perfect spot for execution, almost like someone knew the route or planted the hazard. The fact that no official investigation followed the king's death also raises eyebrows. In modern terms, imagine the president being assassinated on national television, the shooter being gunned down 90 seconds later, and then no autopsy, no trial, no commission. Just a shrug and a change of leadership. That's what happened here. No questions, just coronation day. Within hours, literally hours, Alexander was declared king by the army and the nobles. His father hadn't even been buried yet. Now, to be fair, Macedonia was not a country known for patient diplomacy. This was a warrior society. When one king fell, the vacuum had to be filled immediately to prevent chaos, invasion, or civil war. Hesitation got people killed. But Alexander's rise? It wasn't just fast. It was prepared. He delivered a fiery speech to the army, invoking his father's legacy and promising to continue his conquests. He named trusted generals, Parmenion, Antipater, to key roles. He affirmed the loyalty of the nobility with generous promises. And most importantly, he moved before anyone else even blinked. You start to get the feeling that someone rehearsed this, and maybe that someone wasn't Alexander alone. Olympias, his mother, moved quickly too. She returned to the palace from Epirus, not in mourning, but in command. She began clearing house, removing threats, whispering to allies, and sending very loud messages to anyone still loyal to Philip's other wives. Within days, Cleopatra Eurydice's family was under siege. Her powerful uncle, Attalus, yes, the same one who insulted Pausanias, was away in Asia Minor commanding Macedonian forces. But Olympias had ways of reaching him. Shortly after, Attalus was murdered by his own soldiers. Loyalists to Alexander, of course. The official reason? Treason. The unofficial reason? Tie up another loose end. Back at court, Cleopatra Eurydice was forced into mourning clothes and removed from any political relevance. Not long after, she and her newborn son were both found dead. Some say Olympias had her executed. Others say she was forced to take her own life. In either case, it's yet another neat little bundle tied off with a dagger and a nod. And all of this happened while Pausanias' name was never spoken again. You have to admit, that's pretty tidy for a man who just killed a king. The silence surrounding him is one of the most suspicious parts of this whole affair. Macedonian history is full of blood and betrayal, but they usually like to talk about it. They make statues, write poems, argue in bathhouses. But with Pausanias, nothing. It's as if everyone agreed, without saying so, that his story would be left untold. Was it shame, fear, or strategy? There's one more theory, one that rarely makes the school textbooks. Some fringe historians argue that Pausanias never intended to escape, that his death was part of the plan, that he knew he'd be killed and agreed to it, either out of guilt, patriotism, or protection for someone he loved. That last one chills your bones, doesn't it? Imagine a man so loyal or so broken that he agrees to die for someone else's rise to power. No last words, no legacy, just a name scratched into the margins of a scroll and a dagger buried in a king's ribs. Whatever the truth, it vanished with Pausanias. The only man who might have told us who planned the killing was the first to die after it happened. And that, in a kingdom built on conquest and calculation, is the most suspicious clue of all. You wake to the sound of drums echoing through the hills of Aegae. Not war drums, though Macedonia certainly knows those, but funeral drums, heavy and deliberate. The king's body lies in state, and the entire city holds its breath. Today is Philip II's funeral, a display not only of mourning, but of legacy, power, and very careful choreography. Macedonians didn't do death quietly, especially not for a man like Philip, whose reign had spanned over 2 decades and reshaped the Greek world. His body is being prepared according to ancient custom, washed, anointed with precious oils, wrapped in fine linen, and placed atop a chariot like some glittering sacrifice to history. And here's the part that gets weird. Instead of being buried in a plain tomb or modest chamber, Philip's body is taken to the royal necropolis at Aegae, a sacred site where only the most important of Macedonian kings are laid to rest. His tomb is built fast, but not shoddy. Deep underground, covered by an artificial hill, it's filled with gold, ivory, and symbols of conquest. Even his weapons are entombed with him, as if he might need them in the afterlife. But the real theater? It happens above ground. The funeral procession snakes through the city with mourners in black robes, soldiers in polished bronze, and animals destined for sacrifice. Bulls, goats, maybe even horses, all meant to accompany the king on his final journey. The smoke from the altar rises like a second soul, and leading it all, walking alone, is Alexander. His face is unreadable, not tear-streaked, not triumphant, just focused. Like a man walking through a door only he can see. It's not just about grief, it's about optics. The message is clear. I am the king now. I mourn, but I do not stumble. My enemies should weep, not me. Historians still argue whether this funeral was rushed or rehearsed. Some sources claim it was prepared before Philip's death, with Alexander personally overseeing certain details. Others argue the speed was practical. Macedonia couldn't afford a power vacuum. But whatever the case, this wasn't just a send-off, it was a statement. Now here comes a quirky little detail that always gives modern historians whiplash. Some ancient Macedonians believed kings became gods after death, or at least semi-divine. That meant the funeral wasn't just about burying Philip, it was about launching him into eternity to watch over Macedonia and, perhaps, his son. That also makes the assassination look even more blasphemous. Killing a king on the verge of deification? That's not just murder, that's cosmic treason. But not everyone's buying the divine narrative. In the shadows of the palace, whispers grow. Nobles still loyal to Cleopatra. Eurydice exchange glances. A few generals shift uneasily at Alexander's sudden rise. You get the sense that if Alexander slips, even once, the knives will come out again. And yet, he doesn't. In fact, he starts moving with terrifying precision. First, he meets with the army. Not just the high-ranking officers, but the regular soldiers too. The ones who bleed in real battles. He speaks of continuity, of honoring his father's plans, of bringing all of Greece together for the great war against Persia. He speaks with such clarity and force that the veterans, many of whom fought beside Philip for years, begin to cheer. Alexander also promises rewards: land, loot, honor. And that part? That part lands very well. He then meets with the nobility. Here, he's more delicate. He assures them the succession was lawful, that the murder was not his doing, that he will protect their status, their families, their legacy. And then, very quietly, he begins removing those who hesitate. A general reassigned to the edge of the kingdom. A courtier found guilty of disloyal speech. A priest who once questioned Alexander's claim to divinity retires abruptly. Olympias, meanwhile, plays the role of grieving widow, but not too grieving. Her son is king. Her rival's family is erased. And if her eyes shine just a little too brightly as Philip's pyre is lit, well, no one comments. Here's a mainstream fact that might surprise you. Despite being seen as one of the bloodier transitions in ancient royal history, there was no large-scale civil war following Philip's death. No rebellion. No fracture of the Macedonian state. That says one of two things. Alexander was damn good at consolidating power, or someone had done the dirty work in advance. Probably both. And you can't help but wonder, what if things had gone just slightly differently? What if Pausanias had been captured? What if Cleopatra Eurydice had birthed a strong male heir? What if Philip had lived another year, invaded Persia himself, and returned in glory? You feel the thin line between history and speculation, how easily the path forks in another direction. And yet, the way it went seems so intentional, almost orchestrated. By the end of the funeral, as Philip's ashes are sealed away behind golden doors, Macedonia isn't in mourning. It's in motion. The crown is now Alexander's. And as he steps away from the flames, eyes glinting in the firelight, the world takes its first real look at the boy who will become a god. You'd think, after the murder of a king and a funeral soaked in symbolism, things might slow down. But no. Alexander doesn't so much step into power as explode into it. Within days, he goes from royal son to supreme commander, and the pace at which he consolidates power is honestly kind of terrifying. Let's paint the picture. Philip is barely cold in his tomb, and Alexander is already summoning the companions, his father's most loyal generals and advisors. Men like Parmenion, Antipater, and Perdiccas. These aren't lapdogs. They're seasoned warlords, rough as granite, many old enough to be Alexander's father. But now, they stand before him, helmets tucked respectfully under their arms, waiting for orders. And Alexander doesn't blink. He reappoints some, dismisses others, reassigns troops, all with the poise of a man not learning the ropes but pulling them. He knows where the fault lines are, and he's not walking near them, he's filling them in with stone. But let's not kid ourselves. Not everyone's thrilled. Some in the court still grumble behind their wine cups. They whisper that Alexander's too young, too rash, too Greek in his philosophies. They point to Olympias, how she's suddenly everywhere again, overseeing ceremonies, issuing suggestions that sound a lot like commands. They remember Philip's last queen, Cleopatra Eurydice, and her family, and they notice, nervously, that they're all either dead, missing, or retired with extreme prejudice. It's here that Alexander makes his boldest move yet. He marches to Thessaly. Why? Because after Philip's death, some cities in Greece start testing the water. They slow roll their support. They withhold tribute. One or two even mutter the word independence under their breath like it's a prayer. Thessaly is the big one. It's rich, proud, and absolutely vital to controlling the Greek mainland. So what does Alexander do? He mounts his horse, rides south, and arrives before they even realize he's left the palace. The Thessalian League, expecting a diplomatic boy king, finds itself staring down the polished tips of Alexander's cavalry spears. They fold. Fast. Then he turns to the city of Thebes, which had always had a shaky relationship with Macedon. Thebes blinks, sees the same glint in Alexander's eyes that they saw in Philip's, and they decide to behave. For now. Historians still argue whether this show of force was necessary or overkill. Some say it was diplomacy backed by muscle. Others say it was Alexander establishing the rules. Challenge me and I won't negotiate. I'll arrive. And what of Athens? Now, that's a little trickier. Athens is like the old lion on the hill. Tired, broke, but still arrogant. They send mixed messages, public condolences, private skepticism. But Alexander, to his credit, doesn't burn them down yet. He sends envoys, plays nice, offers olive branches instead of swords. For now, you start to see the pattern. Alexander isn't just seizing power. He's steering the entire narrative. Every move has a message. Every pause is deliberate. And meanwhile, back in Macedonia, more loose ends are tied up. A few nobles suspected of favoring Cleopatra Eurydice? Gone. One accidentally falls from a balcony. Another disappears en route to a border post. A third is politely retired to his estate in what historians like to call a very remote location. Even the priest who dared suggest that Alexander's succession wasn't divinely blessed? Quietly replaced. No fuss. Just a new robe in the temple, and the old one never spoken of again. This might sound like a horror movie, but here's the fascinating bit. Most of the kingdom supports him. Why? Because Alexander is more than just a killer of dissent. He's a beacon of hope and continuity. The troops adore him, the commoners admire him, and the nobility, those still breathing, are just relieved there's no civil war. And let's not forget, Alexander is glamorous. He's not Philip. He doesn't stumble drunk into feasts or flaunt new wives like parade floats. He speaks eloquently, reads Homer, quotes philosophy, wears his armor like it was stitched onto his bones. People don't just obey him, they're kind of in awe of him. Here's a fringe tidbit for you. Some claimed Alexander carried a copy of the Iliad under his pillow, annotated by Aristotle himself. Whether that's true or just a bit of historical fan fiction, it fits. He saw himself as Achilles reborn, heroic, divine, tragically brilliant. And Achilles didn't wait around either. But amid all this glory and power grabs, one thing remains painfully unresolved. No one ever uncovers a conspiracy. No names are linked to Pausanias. No trial is held. No statue built to commemorate Philip's sacrifice or martyrdom. The whole incident is absorbed, as if everyone agrees silently that whatever happened needed to happen. And in the palace halls, among the tapestries and torches, the ghost of Philip still lingers. His former allies now wear Alexander's insignia. His plans for Persia are dusted off and prepared for execution by someone else. His memory is honored in public speeches, but in private, he's gone. And that's exactly how Alexander wants it. You hear it before you see it, the steady thunder of hoofbeats rolling like a summer storm across the stone roads of Macedonia. But this isn't the sound of rebellion or retreat. It's the sound of ambition, mounting speed. Because Alexander, he's no longer just a king. He's a man in motion. The Persian campaign is calling, Philip's great unfinished dream. And Alexander, he's about to inherit it. Not just the plan, but the armies, the maps, the vision of conquering the largest empire the world has ever known. And maybe, just maybe, he sees it as a way to bury the past. But before he can even touch the Persian frontier, he's got to make one thing painfully clear to every Greek city-state. I'm the boss now. And wouldn't you know it? Someone decides to test that. Enter Thebes, the proud old city that had once resisted Philip, then bowed reluctantly, and now, after a brief taste of post-assassination uncertainty, thinks it might try on rebellion one more time. Bad timing. Word reaches Alexander while he's still organizing his supply chains. Thebes has revolted. They've expelled the Macedonian garrison, called for help from Athens, and declared Alexander's rule illegitimate. Oops. Most people expect Alexander to deliberate, maybe send a messenger, maybe wait out the season. Alexander does not do that. He marches 300 miles in under 2 weeks, storming south with a speed that leaves even his enemies blinking. He reaches Thebes so fast that many inside the city don't even believe it's him. Surely not. Surely some other Macedonian general. Nope. It's him, and he's done playing nice. Thebes refuses to surrender. Alexander lays siege, the walls are breached, the city falls. What follows is decisive. Thebes is destroyed, not weakened, not fined, leveled. The city is burned. Its population, those not killed in the assault, are sold into slavery. The message is clearer than sunlight. This is what happens when you question the son of Philip. Historians still argue whether Alexander went too far. Some say it was necessary, a shock and awe tactic to prevent future rebellions. Others say it was overkill, a flash of rage from a young ruler still insecure in his power. But either way, it works. Every other Greek city-state bows. Even Athens, bold and stubborn, sends tribute and ambassadors congratulating Alexander on his peacekeeping efforts. Smooth. But you're wondering something else, aren't you? What does this have to do with Philip's death? Well, everything. Because the destruction of Thebes doesn't just cement Alexander's control. It wipes the slate clean. No one is talking about assassination anymore. No one is whispering about Pausanias or Olympias. Now they're whispering about Alexander and what he might do next. The murder of Philip fades like a stain washed in boiling water, fast, aggressive, and deliberately. And here's where it gets really interesting. Around this time, Alexander begins encouraging a new idea, that he isn't just king by blood or force, he's king by divine right. Some priests begin dropping phrases like son of Zeus. The stories begin to swirl that his real father might not be Philip at all, but a god who visited Olympias in the form of lightning, or a serpent, or both. Fringe? Sure. But Alexander leans into it. He visits Delphi, home of the oracle, and insists on receiving a prophecy about his destiny. When the priestess hesitates, he drags her to the altar himself until she blurts out, "You are invincible." He smiles and walks away. That'll do. Now think about the timing. Your father has just been assassinated. His murderer dies before speaking. The court is purged. The rival's silenced. You rise without opposition. Then instead of just defending your title, you destroy a major city, gather all of Greece behind you, and declare yourself divinely appointed. Coincidence or choreography? And while the people bow and offer laurels, Alexander starts writing letters to Darius III of Persia, to Eastern governors, to Egyptian satraps. Polite, formal letters that basically say, "Hi, I'm coming to conquer you. Please prepare refreshments." All of this barely a year after Philip's death. And the momentum doesn't stop there. Alexander turns his eyes to Asia Minor. He gathers his elite troops, Macedonian phalanx, companion cavalry, archers, engineers, and crosses the Hellespont in 3334 BCE. It's a symbolic move. The crossing of the sea, the beginning of a new age. And somewhere in the distance, Achilles would be proud. And yet, back in Macedonia, the tomb of Philip remains sealed. Quiet, undisturbed. Except by those who remember. There's one last strange little detail. As Alexander begins his Persian campaign, he visits Troy, the mythical battlefield of the Iliad. He honors Achilles, leaves offerings, takes a sacred shield from the temple. But when he's asked about Philip, about the man who raised him, trained him, and possibly died in a plot Alexander benefited from, he says almost nothing, just a few ceremonial praises. A monument. A silence that grows heavier the more powerful he becomes. And that silence? That's the sound of a chapter being closed on purpose. Because for Alexander to become the legend, the conqueror, the god king, Philip has to stay dead. You ever notice how some legends are built not on truth, but on what gets left out? That's the story now. Alexander isn't just building an empire, he's erasing a father. Not by denying Philip existed, of course, but by reshaping the narrative into something shinier, more heroic, and just conveniently missing the whole stabbed in the ribs by your bodyguard on your daughter's wedding day part. Because let's be honest, dead kings don't make great PR, especially when they died messily and mysteriously. So now, we're in the age of image control. Alexander is no longer just a ruler, he's a myth in motion. And the story he wants the world to hear? It's got fewer funerals and a lot more lightning bolts. He doesn't talk about the day Philip died, doesn't mention Pausanias, doesn't question the guards who just happened to kill the assassin instantly. Instead, he promotes himself as the rightful heir, chosen by destiny and blessed by the gods. That's not just political convenience, it's propaganda as immortality. And here's where it starts to stick. In Egypt, Alexander will be declared the son of Amun-Ra, literally a god. In Persia, he adopts royal customs to merge Macedonian and Eastern styles. He begins wearing the diadem, a symbol of kingship, and lets rumors swirl that Zeus, not Philip, fathered him in the form of a thunderbolt. And you know what? People believe it, because belief is easier than doubt. Because if Alexander's rise was divine, it means the blood spilled at the theater in Aegae wasn't a murder, it was a sacrifice. Historians still argue whether this mythologizing was Alexander's design from the start, or just a convenient evolution. Did he invent it, or did it rise around him, like mist on a battlefield, inevitable and thick with reverence? Either way, the result is crystal clear. Philip's legacy starts to fade, and Alexander's begins to burn brighter than the sun. But let's zoom out for a second. The real tragedy in all of this? It's that Philip was a brilliant king. Like, genuinely. The guy took a fragmented backwater kingdom and turned it into a military powerhouse. He created the Macedonian phalanx. He conquered Greece without needing to sack Athens. He built roads, formed alliances, and laid the groundwork for what Alexander would later be praised for. Without Philip, there is no empire. Just a teenage prince in a mountain town reading Homer by candlelight. But who gets the credit? Not the father, the son. And here's a fringy but fascinating fact. Philip had planned his own invasion of Persia. The ships were nearly ready. The army had been assembled. His assassination came just months before the launch. So when Alexander crossed the Hellespont and marched into Asia, he wasn't creating a new plan. He was inheriting one. And improving the branding. It's like someone finishing a marathon with someone else's shoes and getting all the medals because they ran with better posture. Now, whether Alexander intended to erase Philip or not is still up for debate. Some argue he loved his father deeply, but simply couldn't afford to dwell on the past. Others suggest that Olympias, fiercely protective of her son's legacy, made sure no one remembered the less divine parts of the story. Either way, the silence is deafening. There's no epic poem about Philip's triumphs, no state festival in his honor. His tomb remains sealed, but not sacred. Meanwhile, Alexander gets statues, cities, and entire histories carved in marble before he's even 30. And speaking of statues, there's a detail often overlooked. Alexander didn't commission a monument to his father in Persia. Not a shrine, not an obelisk, not even a temple statue. But he did commission many to himself. Some sources suggest this was part of his growing megalomania, that by the time he reached Babylon, he wasn't just a king anymore, but a walking miracle. Others suggest it was strategy, that in a vast and diverse empire, Alexander had to be more than human to unify the people. A conqueror doesn't just rule land, he rules belief. But here's where it circles back. If Alexander's rise was indeed aided by Philip's assassination, then every triumph afterward comes with an asterisk. Because while the world remembers Gaugamela, Babylon, and Alexandria, none of it happens without that single moment in the theater. The blade, the sprint, the silence. And yet, no one wants to ask the hardest question. Not who killed Philip. We know that. The real question is, who wanted him dead the most? And here's a chill you to your socks possibility. What if it wasn't just one person? What if it was a coalition? A mother, a son, a guard with a grudge, a few ambitious generals, each with their own reason, each playing a role, each pushing a little piece of the domino line until the whole thing fell. And afterward, nothing but firelight, crown metal, and the soft thud of a tomb door closing forever. You walk along the silent palace corridors of Pella now, echoes bouncing off the stone walls like secrets. This was once Philip's world, the place he rebuilt, ruled from, and paced at night while dreaming of Persia. But the laughter, the shouts of soldiers training, the sharp bark of commanders, it's all gone, replaced by the quieter hum of Alexander's court, sharper, smarter, and maybe colder. Because this is no longer a home, it's a nerve center. Alexander is away, half a world away really, conquering cities and rewriting maps. But back in Macedonia, the cleanup continues. The things left unfinished after Philip's murder, they're being wrapped up now with quiet efficiency. And who's in charge? Mostly Antipater, one of Philip's most trusted lieutenants. Alexander left him as regent, caretaker of the kingdom while the son of Zeus gallops through Asia. And Antipater doesn't waste time. He's not flashy, but he's precise. Noble families once skeptical of Alexander suddenly find themselves very interested in silence. Former allies of Cleopatra Eurydice who survived the initial purge, they're now nowhere near positions of power. It's not a bloodbath. That would draw attention. This is something more chilling, a slow erasure. People don't die violently now. They just disappear from the records. And here's where things get spooky historical. A few years into Alexander's campaign, stories start surfacing. Rumors, really, about Philip's ghost. Not literal specters clanking chains in the halls, but symbolic ones, a sense of unfinished business. A sense that the kingdom had never truly reckoned with how their king died. One tale, recorded by later Roman writers, says that a statue of Philip placed in the royal court cracked along the face during a summer thunderstorm. No lightning, no impact, just a clean split down the cheek, as if the stone itself couldn't bear the silence anymore. Fringe? Definitely. But these kinds of stories matter, because they reflect a cultural unease, a wound that wasn't healed, a death that was never properly explained. You see, for all of Alexander's success, the assassination of Philip remains this awkward knot in the middle of a glorious tapestry, too obvious to ignore, too dangerous to unravel. So the answer? Don't talk about it. Build a legend tall enough to cast a shadow over the truth, but not everyone buys it. Some of Alexander's later enemies, especially Persian sympathizers, begin spreading their own version of the truth, that Alexander wasn't just a usurper, but a patricide, a killer by proxy. They claim he orchestrated Philip's death to take the throne before Persia could be invaded by anyone else. Historians still argue whether these claims were just wartime slander or actual fragments of forbidden truth. But they're out there, written between the lines, smuggled into scrolls that survived not because of their popularity, but because someone chose not to burn them. And here's where we hit one of the most uncomfortable truths of ancient history. There are no detectives, no forensic labs, no justice systems that seek the truth for truth's sake. There are only victors, and the stories they leave behind. Take the surviving members of Pausanias' family, for instance. Most of them vanish from the records entirely after the assassination. No restitution. No public trial to clear their name or answer questions. One source claims a cousin tried to demand an investigation and was exiled immediately. And what about the royal bodyguards, the Somatophylakes, who served alongside Pausanias? You'd think they'd be interviewed. But no, some were reassigned, others retired. One even died mysteriously during a border dispute just months later. And no scrolls mention any of them ever speaking publicly about that day. Coincidence? Or silence bought at the point of a sword? Meanwhile, Olympias continues her quiet rule back home. Technically, she has no official position, but unofficially, she is feared, respected, and largely untouchable. Even Antipater, hardened as he is, treads carefully around her. She donates to temples, holds religious ceremonies, sponsors poets who write flattering verses about Alexander's divine parentage. All of it reinforcing the idea that Philip was important, but Alexander is inevitable. And if anyone dares whisper otherwise, well, they'd best whisper in another kingdom. Here's a little-known tidbit. After the fall of Thebes, a few of the city's surviving scholars were relocated to Macedonia under watch. One of them, a minor philosopher named Philiscus, reportedly began researching the fallibility of kings. Not a great move. He was dead within a year. Official cause? Illness. But the scrolls he left behind, found later in a dusty Athenian archive, contain a haunting passage. There are truths too dangerous for the living to name. They walk among us like ghosts without chains, buried beneath bronze and glory. And you pause, because maybe that's what Philip is now. A truth too dangerous. A man who built an empire so well, the son who inherited it had to bury not just the body, but the questions too. So the palace is quiet, the torches burn, and somewhere beneath the marble tiles, a whisper curls like smoke. What if the first empire Alexander conquered was his own father? You're in Babylon now. The walls are tall, the air thick with spices and dust, and everywhere you turn, Alexander's name is etched into the stone. Not Philip's, just Alexander. He rides through the city on a white horse, draped in royal purple, flanked by Persian satraps who once swore loyalty to Darius. Now they bow, now they chant. And yet, behind every cheer, there's a strange, almost theatrical emptiness. Because if Alexander looks triumphant, he also looks tired. He's conquered the Persian Empire, he's seen Persepolis burn, he's marched through deserts and mountains. And somewhere along the way, he's stopped pretending to be human. By now, he refers to himself openly as a son of Zeus Ammon. His court follows Eastern customs. Old Macedonian generals, those who once fought for Philip, are being replaced by Persian advisors. The young king who once knelt at his father's knee is now untouchable. And here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because in the heart of Babylon, a new kind of whisper begins to stir. One not about glory or empire, but about paranoia, about ghosts, and about the return of a father. Not literally, but symbolically. It starts with the banquet of reconciliation. Picture it. Alexander invites his senior officers, old friends, battle-hardened men, to a feast meant to heal rifts between the Macedonian and Persian factions. The wine flows. The food is decadent. It's a performance of unity. But then, during a toast, something strange happens. Alexander raises his cup, praises his father's legacy, and tears stream down his face. Not theatrical ones, real ones. The room goes silent. He speaks softly, "I only wish he could see all this." Then drinks. Everyone claps. The music resumes, but you know what you just saw. That was grief. Or maybe, guilt. Historians still argue whether this moment was real or rehearsed. Was Alexander finally breaking under the weight of his father's absence? Or was it just another scene in the myth he was composing about himself? Either way, the guilt doesn't go away. In fact, it spreads. Because one by one, the people who remind him of Philip start to suffer. Take Parmenion, one of Philip's oldest companions, the general who helped Alexander secure the early victory in Asia. Trusted, experienced, loyal, and executed. The reason? His son Philotas was accused of plotting against Alexander. The evidence? Shaky. Torture-induced confessions, rumors, convenient stories. Philotas is tried and killed. Parmenion, despite having no proven involvement, is assassinated in secret on Alexander's orders. A preemptive move, just in case, right? The creeping shadow of paranoia, a pattern. Another general, Cleitus the Black, also once loyal to Philip, dares to question Alexander's Eastern customs at a feast. He reminds the king of how Philip won their freedom, how they owe their power not to Persia or gods, but to Macedonian sweat and strategy. Alexander, drunk and furious, kills Cleitus with a spear. Personally, the man who once saved his life in battle? Gone. His blood soaking the floor of a Persian palace. And afterward, Alexander locks himself in his room for 3 days. Refuses food, refuses company. He whispers apologies to the walls. He dreams of rivers turning to blood. Some say he starts seeing visions of Philip standing at the foot of his bed, unspeaking, just watching. Others say Alexander begins consulting oracles again, desperately seeking validation that he was right to take the crown, to take the glory, to take the empire. But the truth? It's slipping through his fingers like sand. Here's a quirky little side note. Alexander begins keeping a historian at his side at all times now. Not to record the empire, but to record him, his speeches, his dreams, his movements, his versions of events. Because the real enemy now isn't Persia. It's memory. It's the fear that someone someday might remember Philip not as a stepping stone, but as a king in his own right. That someone might say, Alexander didn't build this, he inherited it. So he builds monuments, bigger ones, cities named after himself. 1,000 stories penned with his name in gold leaf. And in none of them, not one, is there a full account of what happened at Aigai. No retelling of Pausanias, no court record of Cleopatra Eurydice's final days, no formal declaration on how the guards managed to kill the assassin so quickly. Just a gap, a perfect, curated silence. And the cost of that silence? It's starting to show. The older Alexander gets, the more people fear him. Not love, not admire, fear. He stops trusting his friends. He starts sleeping with a dagger under his pillow. He drinks too much. He stops writing letters home. And in the corners of his tent, the ghost of Philip grows taller. You see, you can bury a man. You can rewrite his story. You can burn his rivals and silence the chorus. But if you carry his blood in your veins, you can't bury yourself. You wake under a velvet sky, stars flickering like ancient watchers, and in the center of the empire, Babylon, Alexander begins to unravel. It's subtle at first, a shift in tone, a colder stare, longer silences during councils. But if you've been paying attention, and you have, you know what this is. It's what happens when a legend starts to rot from within. By now, Alexander has conquered everything from the Aegean to the Indus. He's been hailed as a pharaoh in Egypt, a god in Persia, and a divine miracle in lands he's barely seen. He commands loyalty across thousands of miles, and yet he's never been more alone. Because for all his triumphs, there's one thing he can't outrun. Philip, the father, the architect, the man whose name sits just beneath the surface of every achievement like a skeleton beneath a marble floor. And now, that skeleton's voice is getting louder. Alexander begins ordering strange rituals. He consults Babylonian magi, not just for prophecies, but for purification rites. He avoids certain temples entirely. One of his closest bodyguards, when asked to deliver wine one evening, finds the king mid-conversation, with no one else in the room. Historians still argue whether Alexander suffered from a genuine psychological break or if these behaviors were exaggerated by his enemies. Some ancient writers, especially those unfriendly to his memory, claim he became obsessed with omens, shadows, and voices in the night. But even the more sympathetic accounts agree on one thing. His fear grew. Not of enemies, not of rebellion, but of something unfinished. You know what's weird? Alexander never once returned to Philip's tomb after leaving Macedonia. Not even after conquering the world. Not even when his army wintered nearby. He had time, he had horses, he had the power, but he never went back. And that silence is deafening. Meanwhile, his inner circle begins to splinter. Some of the original Macedonian officers, those who once pledged loyalty to Philip, now find themselves isolated, demoted, or conveniently transferred to the far reaches of the empire. Others simply disappear. Take Callisthenes, the philosopher and court historian. He was one of Aristotle's pupils, a brilliant mind. He wrote glowingly of Alexander's early campaigns. But when the king began demanding divine honors, expecting his men to bow and kiss the ground before him, Callisthenes refused. He reminded the court that Philip never demanded such things, that a true king ruled by respect, not ritual. You can imagine how that went over. Alexander had him arrested for treason. Callisthenes died in captivity. No trial, no monument. Another Philip loyalist gone. And if you're starting to notice a pattern, so did Plutarch, writing centuries later. He wondered whether these deaths were connected, not just to power politics, but to a deeper need, a need to cleanse the past. Here's a fringe tidbit for you. Some ancient sources claimed Alexander began having nightmares about his father's assassination. Not as a distant memory, but as if he were there. As if the knife had pierced his ribs, as if the sprint across the courtyard were his last breath. A kind of haunted empathy, or maybe guilt turned inside out. Either way, the dreams became frequent. And then came the banquet at Babylon. It's the summer of 323 BCE. Alexander is 32, a god to some, a tyrant to others, and at this lavish celebration, he drinks heavily, more than usual. The wine is strong, the conversation oddly tense. He toasts Hephaestion, his closest friend, long dead. He toasts his campaigns, he toasts the gods. Then he suddenly collapses. Fever, pain, incoherence. He's taken to his quarters. His generals crowd around, worried but helpless. The physicians try everything, baths, herbs, incantations. Nothing works. For 11 days, Alexander burns, delirious, mute, his empire holding its breath. And what does he say in the final hours? According to one account, just one, whispered through time, he whispers a name. Not Zeus, not Darius, not even Hephaestion, but Father. We don't know what he meant. Was it a plea for forgiveness? A final confession? Or simply the fragmented echo of a son who never outran his blood? Historians still argue whether Alexander was poisoned, succumbed to malaria, typhoid, or alcohol-related illness. The records are suspiciously vague. Some say the wine was tampered with. Others say the gods struck him down for pride. But here's what no one really talks about. He died without naming a successor. No heir, no clear plan, just a whispered phrase, "To the strongest." And with that, the man who tried to replace his father with fire, gold, and myth became a ghost of his own. The king is dead. No thunder crashes. No lightning splits the sky. Just the heavy, unreal silence of Babylon's royal palace, choked with incense and uncertainty. Alexander's body lies still on a golden bier, skin pale, lips cracked. The muscles that once carried the weight of empires now limp beneath linen sheets. But even in death, he dominates the room. His generals stand in a tense semicircle. Perdiccas, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Cassander, men who have marched across the known world, who've tasted blood and glory by his side. And yet, they're not looking at the body. Not really. They're watching each other. Because Alexander left behind no heir, no plan, and crucially no closure. And under the polished floor, buried deep in every glance and unspoken sentence, the ghost of Philip II stirs once again. You see, Alexander may have erased his father from the monuments, but in this moment, this political vacuum, Philip comes roaring back. His name is whispered in strategy meetings. His methods are cited. His alliances, his reforms, his example. Suddenly, they matter again. And here's where it gets downright ironic. The very people who helped Alexander forge his divine image now start imitating Philip to legitimize their own claims. Ptolemy, for instance, makes a bold move. He steals Alexander's body en route to Macedonia and ships it to Egypt. Why? Because whoever buries the king inherits part of his legitimacy. But Ptolemy doesn't entomb him beside Philip. Not even close. He builds a new tomb, a new myth, one that ends with him. Historians still argue whether this was reverence or rebranding. But it tells you something important. In a world without Alexander, the past becomes valuable again. Which brings us to the other generals, men who had fought under both father and son. Cassander is the most fascinating. He was Philip's son-in-law, a product of the old guard. He'd always resented Alexander's divine airs, his Persian clothing, his obsession with being more than mortal. And now, he begins a quiet, brutal restoration campaign. First, he executes Olympias, Alexander's mother. That's right. The queen, who may have orchestrated Philip's assassination, is finally cornered and put on trial. Not a fair trial, not a public spectacle, just a cold, calculated silencing. The verdict is a formality. The execution? Bloody. Cassander claims it's about justice, about order. But those who know. It's revenge. For Philip. Then, Cassander marries Thessalonike, Philip's daughter by another wife. He rebuilds cities in Macedonia, not in Alexander's name, but Philip's. He raises statues, issues coins. He doesn't say it out loud, but the message is clear. The wrong son died. And suddenly, the narrative flips again. For decades, Philip was the shadow, the warm-up act to Alexander's epic. But now, with the empire fracturing, with civil wars breaking out, and no king left to enforce the dream, people start re-evaluating the old man. He's no longer just a murdered monarch. He's the man who built the machine. The phalanx? Philip's. The generals? Philip's protégés. The Persian invasion plan? You guessed it. Philip's map, just redrawn by his son. And here's your fringe tidbit of the day. In some remote parts of Macedonia, local cults begin honoring Philip as a demigod. Not Zeus-born, not thunder-drenched, just a mortal man who outwitted chaos and forged an empire from tribal dust. You hear that? That's the past growling back. But there's one place where Philip's name never returns. His tomb. Still sealed, still silent, still sitting in Aegae, untouched by the power struggles erupting like wildfires across the empire. No parade of pilgrims, no royal reforms announced in his honor, no son kneeling at the threshold. Because while the world reclaims his memory, no one, not even the victors, wants to go digging too deep into what really happened there. Theater, wedding, assassin. One scream, one sprint, one blade. And then a silence so profound, so orchestrated, it lasted decades. Historians today, they try. They peer into old scrolls, inscriptions, gaps in timelines. They argue over motives, theories, the missing testimonies. Some suggest Alexander's entire rule was a guilt-ridden overcompensation. Others think Olympias was the true mastermind. But no one, not one scholar, can answer this. If Alexander didn't kill his father, why didn't he look for who did? That question is the lock. Philip's tomb is the vault. And history? Well, history prefers it that way. The sun rises over Aegae, and the air is still, almost reverent. Time moves differently here. The mountains stand exactly as they did the day Philip was buried. The theater where he died is quiet now, its stones worn smooth by centuries of wind and forgetting. Tourists come, scholars murmur. But the question, the real question, still hangs in the air like smoke from a long-dead fire. What really happened to Philip II of Macedon? You stand before his tomb. A real one, discovered in the 1970s, buried beneath a great tumulus. Inside, a golden larnax said to hold his bones, a royal armor set, a ceremonial crown, evidence of a king's burial. There's almost no doubt it's him, and yet everything about it feels like a sealed confession. No inscriptions, no detailed account, no mosaic proudly depicting his reign. Just a hush, like someone wanted this story closed and locked away, not shared. Think about that. This was the man who rebuilt Macedonia, who invented the most feared military structure in the ancient world, who united the Greek city-states, who planned the greatest invasion in ancient history, and yet his tomb whispers instead of shouts. Meanwhile, his son's name is etched into over 70 cities. His image is stamped on coins from Athens to Afghanistan. He's studied, dramatized, idolized. But Philip is a footnote, and that's not an accident. You see, Alexander's greatest conquest may not have been Persia or Egypt. It may not have even been the hearts of his soldiers or the minds of poets. It was the narrative. He didn't just take an empire, he took the pen. He sculpted himself into legend by stripping away the inconvenient truths of his origin. He turned his father's assassination into an echo, just loud enough to remember, never loud enough to question. And the world played along. Even today, textbooks breeze past Philip's murder. Tour guides at Aegae mention it like trivia. Writers focus on the drama, a jilted bodyguard, they say, a lover's revenge. It's tidy, palatable, it fits on a placard. But what if it wasn't? What if it was the first domino, the thing that had to happen for Alexander to rise? Let's review for a moment. You have a king, Philip, aging, restless, surrounded by dangerous ambition. A wife, Olympias, fierce, politically sharp, recently humiliated. A son, Alexander, young, brilliant, pushed aside by new royal marriages. And a bodyguard, Pausanias, angry, publicly embarrassed, desperate to reclaim his honor. And then, conveniently, everything lines up. Pausanias kills the king. He's slain immediately before he can speak. No formal investigation, no trial. And within hours, Alexander is declared king. Now tell me that doesn't feel like a chess game with the last 5 moves already mapped out. Historians still argue whether we'll ever know the full truth, whether it lies buried with Olympias, or in the missing accounts of royal scribes, or in the silence of Philip's own tomb. Some believe the truth died with Alexander. Others believe it never really lived, only existed as shadow and speculation. But here's what we do know. Philip deserved more. More than a passing nod in his son's story. More than a hushed grave behind a locked bronze door. He deserved to be remembered not as a stepping stone, but as the foundation. Because while Alexander may have conquered the world, Philip built the map. And now, as the wind moves softly through the hills of Aegae and the sun burns low behind the tombstones, you realize something. Legends are written in ink. But truth is buried in stone. So now, as the echoes of ancient footfalls fade and the dust settles on the marble floors of long-dead palaces, let's leave the conspiracies, the crown, and the ghosts behind. Let's slow it all down. Close your eyes and picture it. That distant theater in Aegae, the golden crown resting quietly in a tomb no one dared reopen, and the sun, brilliant, flawed, furious, chasing immortality across deserts and empires, perhaps always with one eye on the shadow behind him. Maybe Philip still walks those palace halls in memory. Maybe the truth lies there, curled like old parchment, brittle and unread. But tonight, we don't need to solve it. We only need to sit with it. Let it be what it is. Complicated, echoing, unfinished. Let the questions float gently like incense in a quiet temple, unanswered but no longer ignored. You've traveled far tonight, from royal courts to battlefields, from betrayal to ambition, and now it's time to return. So lie back. Let the names, Philip, Alexander, Olympias, fade into mist. Let the flicker of torches along the tomb walls dim, one by one. And as the silence of history rises like a tide, know that you've glimpsed something deeper than fact, the very soul of legacy, wrapped in mystery, sharpened by time. Sleep easy, friend. Tomorrow, the empires can rise again. But for now, let the past rest.